atmosphere was thick with tension. I felt like I was invisible, unwanted. My brother's harsh words lingered in the air, and my sister-in-law, sitting next to me, let out a quiet, sly smile, her eyes narrowing in satisfaction as she watched the surprise flicker across my face. Then I turned to our mother, the woman I had shared my life with for so many years. She didn't look at me the way I hoped. Instead, her words came out slowly, dripping with resignation. Living with your brother and his wife, who went to a really good university and works at a top company, seems like a better choice than staying with you, Linda. You just stay inside all the time, she said, her tone calm, almost indifferent. I froze. All those years of helping, sacrificing, putting my family first, and yet it felt like none of it mattered. Not to her. My mother, my brother, and his wife, none of them seemed to see how much I had given, how much I had done. The money I'd sent home, the late nights working, the endless tasks I took on without a single word of thanks. But what could I do? What could I say? I had no choice. I nodded, though my chest tightened with pain. Okay, I whispered. I'll go, but don't ask me for help again. I started to gather my things, the room feeling smaller with each movement, each second of silence. And then she spoke. My sister-in-law, with that same smug expression. Giving up so easily, Linda? Her voice was sweet, but the words cut deep. But I didn't argue. I knew better. What no one seemed to understand was that life had a way of balancing itself out, that their smugness might not last forever. I didn't say it, but I thought it. Nobody knows who will have a harder time in the future. My name is Linda, and I've my mark in the world of online business. I never expected this to be my path. Back when I was in university, I thought I'd land a regular job, just like everyone else. But everything changed during my second year. My father fell ill. He needed someone to care for him, someone who could be there every single day. My mother wasn't great with housework, and even though we hired caregivers, they couldn't always be there. So my mom would step in when she could, but it wasn't enough. I'd watch her ignore my father's needs, telling him to wait. It made me anxious. The future weighed on me. Who would care for Dad when I finally had to leave for a full-time job? I couldn't rely on my mother alone. So I started looking for ways to earn money from home, ways to keep my father safe while building something for myself. I dove into online business during my university years, using the knowledge I gained in economics. I partnered with friends who knew about management and finance, and we recruited others skilled in tech and computers. Together, we created an online business venture. We rented a nice office space, a place where staff could work if they needed quiet away from home or where new hires could learn. But for me, I hardly ever went. My main workspace was at home with my father. It was there that I built everything, managing the business while taking care of him. One day, Dad asked me a question that made my heart sink. Did you give up a full-time job for me, or was it hard to find one after graduation? I could feel the weight of his words, but I explained, calmly, without emotion, that I had been running my online business since university. It was doing well, and I was able to work from home. I could balance both. Dad's face softened. His eyes held pride and gratitude. You've become a responsible adult, he said. It meant everything to me, those simple words. But I wasn't the only child. I had an older brother, Tom. He was 2 years older than me. Tom was the smart one, the one who excelled at school. After graduating from a prestigious university, he landed a job at an impressive company. We were proud of him, surprised but happy for his success. But when we reached out to congratulate him, his response was cold. He told us he was starting a new life in the city, that he didn't plan to come back home. He wanted us to believe he was thriving, doing well on his own. Then, without another word, he hung up. From that day on, Tom cut all ties. No calls, no messages, nothing. We couldn't get in touch with him, no matter how hard we tried. Even with Dad's health worsening, even though he needed care every single day, Tom's silence remained deafening. It was as if he had no intention of ever coming back. He didn't care about his responsibilities to the family. Then, one day, out of the blue, we received a call from Mom. She told us Tom wanted to get married and asked if we could contribute to his wedding gift. The amount? Nearly $1 million. Mom didn't look pleased when she told us. She was clearly worried about our finances. Her part-time job barely covered her daily expenses, lunches out, shopping with friends. She never saved much. So, when she suggested giving Tom such a large sum of money, I was stunned. We hadn't heard from him in so long. And now this? Dad's reaction was calm at first, but his anger simmered to the surface. Why should we give him all that money? He snapped. He hasn't even spoken to us in years. He's never shown any gratitude for what we've done for him. He was angry, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. Mom tried to explain, her voice soft. Think about it. Tom's getting married. I want him to have a good life, maybe even give us grandchildren. It's what parents want. Please understand." I felt the pain in her words, but my heart broke at the same time. The reason I didn't pursue a typical job was because of her. It hurt to hear her say those things, as if my sacrifices were just a given. Dad was equally upset, and in the heated argument that followed, I listened from the next room, unsure of what to do. I knew how this story ended. My mom had always favored Tom. She praised him for everything, never once acknowledging the toll it had taken on me to stay home and care for Dad. I had never complained, never asked for anything. But that night, as the argument raged on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of all those years of silent sacrifice. After Mom left for dinner, Dad turned to me, his voice filled with gratitude. "Linda, thank you for always being here for me." He was trying to reassure me, but I could see the pain in his eyes too. "It's okay, Dad," I replied, my voice steady but my heart breaking inside. "I've known for a long time that Mom favors Tom. I'm used to it." And then, with a quiet sigh, I added, "I wish I could do more for you, Dad. You've done so much for me." He smiled weakly, but the sadness in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. My father's smile, warm and reassuring, brought a fleeting sense of comfort. But there was a storm brewing inside me, one that I couldn't shake. I couldn't understand how my mother, who had been blessed with such a loving father, could act so selfishly. And my brother, who had shut us out for years, now suddenly showed up, asking for a huge wedding gift. It felt like a slap in the face. The resentment was building, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. But the most shocking thing came not long after. One morning, I went to check on Dad, only to find him still, unresponsive. My heart stopped. I called an ambulance, but it was too late. He was already gone. The loss hit me like a tidal wave, but I had no time to process it. People arrived at the funeral, paying their respects as though they truly knew him, as if they'd been there for him. It was overwhelming. Normally, Mom would have taken charge of the arrangements, but she was too busy, too distracted. All she seemed to care about was her phone. It was as though she was more focused on that than on the fact that my father had just passed away. I couldn't help but feel angry. Angry at her coldness, at her indifference. But still, I had to do what needed to be done. I focused on the funeral, making sure Dad got the proper send-off he deserved. And then, my brother showed up. I hadn't expected him, not like this. He walked in with a woman draped in a flashy dress, his own attire far too casual for the occasion. It was wrong, so wrong. Everyone in the room was taken aback by the audacity of it all, but my mother greeted him with a wide smile. "I'm glad you're here, Tom. Now your father's inheritance will be ours," she said, the words hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. The room went cold. It was as though someone had turned off the warmth in the air. Everyone was stunned, confused. Disbelief spread like wildfire. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Honestly," Tom spoke loudly, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "I don't think Linda should expect any inheritance. She's just been at home, taking care of Dad." His words stung. They weren't just cruel, they were a direct attack. I sighed deeply, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. Of course, he knew about our situation. He must have learned everything from Mom. But what he didn't seem to understand, or perhaps didn't care to, was that I had given so much of myself to this family. I had contributed. Dad had worked hard his whole life. But now, hearing my brother speak so flippantly about inheritance at a funeral, it felt disrespectful. It felt wrong. The tension in the room was palpable. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Should we leave now?" Tom asked, his voice tinged with impatience. "We'll get the inheritance anyway." Mom, pulling him along, agreed. "Shall we go get Sashi?" She asked, seemingly unfazed by the awkwardness of the moment. The three of them left, and I was left standing there, stunned. Other relatives were equally shocked, some whispering amongst themselves, but I stayed calm. For Dad. I kept my irritation in check and pushed forward, handling the funeral as best I could. I couldn't let them ruin this. Not for Dad. When I returned home, the sight that greeted me was just as unsettling. The dining table was a mess, strewn with 3 boxes of sushi, likely ordered for delivery. From the living room came the sounds of laughter, of voices echoing with careless joy. It was them, Mom, Tom, and his wife Jessica, enjoying themselves as if nothing had happened. It was incomprehensible. "Hey, you're late, Linda." Tom's voice rang out, full of mock cheer. "Can you make some snacks and grab more alcohol?" I was frozen in place. The insensitivity was overwhelming. Didn't they know? Didn't they feel the weight of what had just happened? I couldn't believe they didn't see how wrong it was to carry on like this. Even Mom, who should have known better, was joining in. It was like they didn't care. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to speak up. "There's no inheritance for you," I said firmly. "I refuse to get you more drinks or snacks." Tom, clearly drunk, didn't take it well. What do you mean, Linda? He snapped. You've always been at home, causing trouble for Dad. Ma, it's only fair we use his assets. I was livid. How could he say such things? How could he feel so entitled to something that wasn't his? Dad had paid for all of Tom's college expenses, and now Tom acted as if he owed him nothing. It made me sick. Isn't this house Dad's? Tom asked, his voice filled with expectation. As the eldest son, it should be mine. Why is Linda, who does nothing all day, still living here? Mom, who used to show some warmth toward me, seemed to be on his side now. The warmth in her eyes had vanished, replaced by indifference. This house is mine, Tom stated firmly, his words like a decree. I want Linda out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How had everything changed so quickly? Mom didn't defend me. She didn't even seem to care. I feel more comfortable living with my son and his wife, who have done well in life, than with you, Linda, she said, her voice detached. I felt the sting of her words. The betrayal was unbearable. I had been the one who stayed, the one who sacrificed. Yet it was all for nothing. I sighed, the weight of everything pressing down on me. It was time to speak up. I'll leave, I said, my voice steady but laced with sorrow. Please, don't ask anything of me anymore. As I packed up my things, I overheard my sister-in-law's mocking voice. She's really poor, don't you think? Their laughter echoed in my ears. I just smiled, but it was bitter. Yes, right now, I might seem like the most miserable one. But there was something they didn't know. This house? It had been legally mine since Dad was alive. He had entrusted it to me, even though Mom still lived here and would claim she spent most of her life here. But legally, it was mine. Still, seeing her behave so coldly at Dad's funeral made me reconsider everything. This house, this life, I no longer wanted it. I was tired of the relationships, tired of the deceit. And so, I made my decision. I was going to sell it. As I thought about it, I felt a strange sense of peace. Let them believe they were entitled to Dad's inheritance. Let them wallow in their false expectations. It didn't matter anymore. It was over. Before Mom's health had deteriorated, she had a stable income. But as her condition worsened, she stopped working. She spent her savings on hiring help, on daily expenses, until it was gone. When Dad fell ill, I started sending $3,000 a month to help with the household costs. Mom, though she did the housework, wasn't good with money. She'd spend impulsively, buying things we didn't need, ignoring sales, running up the bills. She used her part-time income for her hobbies, for things she wanted. And all the while, the savings that Dad had worked so hard to accumulate slowly disappeared. By the time I realized Dad's savings were gone, I had no choice but to step in. And so, I had. Now, as I prepared to leave, I withdrew the last of my money, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of finality. I couldn't stand the thought of Mom continuing to drain the household money. The next day, something unexpected happened. Did you take the household money, Linda? Mom's voice pierced the quiet morning, her tone filled with disbelief and a hint of frustration. I frowned, confused. What household money? I asked. Dad's savings, they're all gone. The words felt cold as they left my mouth. When I checked, you used them all up. Didn't you realize? I heard Mom scrambling in the background, probably looking for the ledger I had left on the table. I had detailed everything, how she kept taking money from Dad's savings. Dad knew about it too. When his savings were gone, I stepped in, giving $3,000 each month to help support the house. But that wasn't the worst of it. Suddenly, I heard the door open. My brother's voice rang out. Mom, what's going on? Wasn't there supposed to be an inheritance after Dad passed? Did you use it all? His voice was full of anger and disbelief, and his wife's sharp voice echoed from the background. I can't believe this, Mom. You really called us back here, expecting us to support you financially? That's harsh. It was all becoming clear to me. Mom had only called them back for the inheritance. I knew then that they wouldn't trust her anymore. We left our stable jobs to come here, expecting to get Dad's inheritance. How are we supposed to live now? Tom's voice crackled with frustration. His tone sounded different, like the weight of the situation was finally sinking in. But I wasn't bothered by their decisions. It didn't affect me. Not anymore. My brother's voice cut through the tension. And what about the $2,700 you've been getting every month, Mom? He was turning everything over, pressing her on every detail. You always said Linda wasn't working. What about that? Mom suddenly turned to look at me, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. What? Linda? She stammered. I couldn't help but smile, but it wasn't a happy smile. You should look into remote work, I said lightly. These days, you can have a job without leaving home. I had never told them about my online business. They didn't need to know. If they found out, they would only lean on me more, maybe even interfere. I wasn't about to let that happen. Then, Mom's voice softened. Please, Come back. Let's be a family again, she pleaded. Her tone was small, as though she hadn't wronged me at all. But I had no intention of going back. Not anymore. Mom, I said, my voice cold, you just want to rely on my money, don't you? And about the house, when Dad was alive, I took over ownership because of the property taxes. It's mine now. Mom's breath caught in her throat. I continued, I don't plan to live there anymore. I've asked Uncle to sell it. He's furious about what happened at Dad's funeral, and if Tom and his family stay there, he'll kick them out. The shock in Mom's voice was unmistakable. I could almost see her face contorting in disbelief. I heard Tom asking in the background, his voice frantic. What's going on? I couldn't answer him. Not now, not like this. I decided it was better to leave it all to Uncle. He promised he'd handle things, explain everything to Mom and Tom. I took a deep breath. Goodbye, I said. I'm cutting ties with you and Mom. I won't be using this phone anymore. And with that, I ended the call. I could only imagine their shock. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was fleeting. They'd be surprised, yes, but I was done. It would be hard for them to find me, but I had already made up my mind. I had plans. Plans I'd never shared with anyone, not even Dad. I had always dreamed of living in a warm, tropical country, a place with a rich, diverse culture. When Mom and Tom asked me to leave after Dad's death, I saw it as my chance to finally make my dream a reality. As soon as I was evicted from the house, I packed up and began searching for a place abroad. I wanted somewhere quiet, close to the beach. The search consumed me, and soon I found the perfect spot. Now, I'm living in a short-term rental apartment near the city center, the kind with great transportation links. It's ideal for preparing my move abroad. Meanwhile, Mom, Tom, and his wife were scrambling to find a new place to live after being evicted. They probably hadn't thought about me, not with everything going on in their own lives. By the time I heard they were cramped in a small apartment, struggling to make ends meet, I was already settling into my new life. Abroad. My uncle had hired a detective agency to discreetly monitor them, and they'd uncovered the full extent of their struggles, how they were spending beyond their means, borrowing money from risky lenders. It wasn't my problem anymore. I had cut ties. I was done. It was unlikely I'd ever see them again. Not after everything that had